This is CBY, Christian Broadcasting of Yakima, your local Christian television station, bringing to our valley quality Christian programming for more than 40 years.
What we're going to do is look at a changing dynamic that's happening in America that's involving Christians and people of faith, biblical folks, in a need to be politically involved. And to do that, one of the things that has started changing is a lot of cities have started passing NDOs, non-discrimination ordinances. They've gone across the nation, but San Antonio did one, and it had some interesting dynamics with San Antonio. Let me show you some of the legal analysis of what happened in San Antonio and explain what's going here. As you look at San Antonio, they came up with a position that says, okay, if you publicly disagree with homosexuality or homosexual marriage, and San Antonio's in Texas, Texas had a vote on a marriage amendment. 70% of Texas said, we think marriage between a man and a woman. They said, no. If you disagree with that, if you think marriage, traditional marriage is right, if you disagree with homosexual marriage, then in the city we have a position that we're going to take against you. So if you publicly criticize or come out against homosexual marriage or homosexuality, there were several things that came out in the ordinance. Number one, you could be dismissed from office, from malfeasance in office. So if you're elected to office in San Antonio, you criticize homosexuality, homosexual marriage, didn't matter what the voters said, you're out of office. It also became a Class C misdemeanor. So it is a crime, literally. It's not just we disagree with your free speech, we will criminalize it, make it a crime. On top of that, there's a $500 a day fine. So if you are a Christian person and you have a business that wants to run the Christian values, and someone comes to you and says, I want you to cater or do a cake or photography at my homosexual wedding, and first off, Texas does not allow that, but San Antonio says if you say no to that, then we will fine you $500 a day at your business for trying to express your Christian convictions. And this is the position that really the world has held for 5,500 years until the last generation or so. So being where we've traditionally been with faith and with values is now penalized $500 a day. In addition to that, you're prohibited from running from office. So if it's found out that you've criticized homosexuality, homosexual marriage, you cannot run for office in San Antonio. We have just excluded you from office. And then on top of that, you're prohibited from doing business with the city or even being appointed to an office in the city. If you're a business and want to do business, do construction, no. If you don't have the city's position on homosexuality, homosexual marriage. And so a lot of Christians said, whoa, this is not a good deal. And that's where churches in San Antonio started standing up and saying, we've got to stop this. I mean, this is directly targeting us for what we believe. It's for our faith. It's for what we've held for a number of generations and years and centuries and millennia. And this is not right. So San Antonio has really started a movement, and it's something that's going across the nation as well. There's a movement called the National Black Robe Regiment, which is a return to the ministers of the American Revolution. The British called them the Black Robe Regiment because of the black robes they wore, but they were standing up against what was considered tyranny or wrong. They stood for righteousness. And so that's starting to happen again. Now, one of the things that happens, if you think about what happened in San Antonio, you say, wait a minute, you're going to criminalize my speech, you're going to criminalize my conscience, you're going to criminalize my choice of faith. You can't do that. The Constitution, it gives us all these rights in the Constitution. You can't come after my faith or my conscience or my speech. You know, theoretically, our rights are constitutionally given. They're all there. But the problem is they have to be politically protected. If you have people in office who don't agree with the Constitution or the values, they're not going to follow the Constitution or the law or anything else. They'll make their own laws that directly violate the Constitution. So politics becomes involved at this point. If you don't have the right kind of people in office with the right kind of values, it doesn't matter what your laws say or what your Constitution. Well, you know, I have a biblical right to express my faith. Yeah, you do. You have biblical rights, but again, they are politically protected. So our rights come from the Bible, but they are politically protected. Great example, Phoenix, Arizona, pastor there having a Bible study in his home. It turns out in Phoenix they have a city ordinance that prohibits Bible studies in your home. So he got 90 days in jail for having a Bible study in his home. In America, you can't do that. Why, God gave me the right to preach the gospel. Yeah, but the city of Phoenix does not recognize your right to preach the gospel. You got a right to preach the gospel anywhere you want to. So go to Saudi Arabia, climb up on a street corner, preach the gospel, see what happens there. It's not going to be a good outcome because you don't have political protection there. So we have biblically given rights, we have constitutionally given rights, and for generations we've enjoyed them, never thought about losing them. Now that we're starting to lose them, we recognize, you know what, they're politically protected. If we do not get politically active in some of these areas, we will be penalized for what we believe, what we say, what we think, what we do. And what we're doing is what's been done for 5,500 years, quite frankly, within a biblical worldview. So that's why this is becoming a dynamic of interest. Now, in saying that and in talking about politics and using things like the non-discrimination ordinances going across the nation as a launching point, let's talk about how Christians need to approach politics. We've had a lot of Christians involved in office over the years. Frederick Douglass is a great example. He is a civil rights leader, and Frederick Douglass, as a civil rights leader, what we don't get taught in textbooks today is he's also a minister of the gospel. He was an AME Zion minister. So here you have a Christian minister very involved in politics. He served in 4 different presidential administrations, and across his decades of political activity, he had one standard that he used for all of his politics. All the different presidents, all the different administrations, one standard from which he never moved, and this is the right starting place for Christians. Look what Frederick Douglass said. He said, I have one great political idea. He said, that idea is an old one. It's widely and generally assented to. Nevertheless, it's generally trampled on and disregarded. Everybody theoretically says, yeah, I agree with that, but when it comes to practice, they really don't do it in practice. Well, what is that great political idea? He says, the best expression of it I have found in the Bible. It is in substance, righteousness exalts a nation, sins a reproach to any people. He said, this is the baseline of my politics. This is what I judge what I'm for, what I'm against, and that's what he said. He says, this constitutes my politics. The negative and the positive, what I'm for, what I'm against is based on that Bible verse. He said, the whole of my politics. I feel it my duty to do all in my power to infuse this in the public mind. Now, his standard that he repeated was nothing more than Proverbs 14:34. Righteousness exalts a nation, sins a reproach to any people. But when you look at that, if righteousness exalts a nation, how does God measure righteousness in a nation? Quite frankly, what is the standard for righteousness in a nation? Or for that matter, as you look across the Bible, you have Exodus 18:21 where it talks about not only national, but you also have things at the state level. What's the standard for righteousness at the state level? What's the standard for righteousness at what we would call the county level or the local level? You look at those leaders of tens, fifties, hundreds, thousands in the Bible, all those. How does God measure righteousness in any of those areas? And the answer is by the public policies they have and by how well those policies conform to God's standards. That public policies is something that God can bless or is it something He's going to have to oppose, and that's what exalts a nation. And because God bases righteousness on public policies you have, public policies affect every single person in an area, even if they disagree with that policy. Probably 90% of the city of San Antonio disagrees with that non-discrimination ordinance, but that city has taken a position God cannot bless. That's going to affect 100% of the people in the city, even if 90% disagree with the policy. This man, Reverend Chandler Robbins, he was actually addressing the legislature of Massachusetts. And it used to be a tradition in America for about 170 years that you started your state legislative sessions by having a joint session of the legislature. The governor, lieutenant governor, the House, Senate all came in, and you brought a minister in to start the legislative session with a sermon. And as he is speaking to the entire elected bodies in Massachusetts, he's reminding them of the same principle. He said, guys, the policies you take will have an effect on every single citizen in this state. He explained this way. He said, the supreme governor of the world rewards or punishes nations and civil communities only in this life. He said political bodies are but the creatures of time. They exist only right now, and God rewards or punishes them right now. He says they have no existence as such, but in the present state, consequently, they're incapable of punishments or rewards in the future. He says we can conceive of no way in which the divine being shall therefore manifest the purity of His nature towards such societies, but by rewarding or punishing them here according to their public conduct. That's one reason that biblical people, Christians, people of faith have to be involved in public policy decisions, because those public policy decisions do result in consequences. A great example of that is what you see in the Bible with the story of Elijah. Remember Elijah? The leaders then were Ahab and Jezebel. They were very wicked leaders. They had a lot of bad policy. They were into eminent domain. You remember they took Naboth's vineyard, said the government wants this private property. The prophet Elijah confronts them, says, because of the wickedness of your administration, what you've done in public policy, we've gone 3.5 years without rain in this nation. Now, I want you to remember that God had already confronted Elijah and said, you know, there's 7,000 folks in this nation that never bowed their knee to Baal. I got 7,000 righteous folks. That's right, they were righteous, but they all went 3.5 years without rain. Even the good guys had to go through the national judgment brought on by bad policies from national leaders. And so even if you disagree with those policies, even if you disagree with non-discrimination ordinances, if your city has one, God's not going to be able to bless that. There's no way He takes a position on it. So even for those who don't get involved in politics, you will pay a price for what your political leaders do. You're not isolated from that because there is no future for a political body. They're rewarded, punished right there at that point in time. Now, from that background, the righteousness exalts a nation. How do you end up getting righteous policies in a city, a state, a nation, a county? How do you get those righteous policies? And the answer is given strictly out of the Bible. We get righteous policies enacted by Proverbs 29:2 that says, when the righteous rule, the people rejoice. When the wicked rule, the people groan. If you get the right philosophy of people in office, they will do things that God can bless. If you get the wrong philosophy of people in office, they will do things that God will oppose, and that affects every single individual under their jurisdiction. So the best way to have righteous policies is to have God-fearing leaders. You get God-fearing leaders, they understand they're accountable to God, they won't pass those kind of policies. That goes back to why politics is important. Politics is merely the process of putting leaders in office. If you put the right kind of leaders in office, you don't have to worry about the downstream effects of bad policies. Now, having said that, and looking at how to go at this, and looking even historically at what we do with this, let me take you back to the founding of America. Because the founding of America is the first time that we start, as Americans, creating our very own governments. We've never had to do this before. It came about as a result of the American Revolution. Because of what happened in the American Revolution, specifically when they signed the Declaration of Independence, well, they've separated from Great Britain, but they've done something else. All 13 of those colonies had British-run governments. And by separating from Great Britain, they have wiped out 13 state governments. So these guys that signed the Declaration of Independence have just abolished 13 state governments. They firmly believe, out of Romans 13, out of 1 Peter, out of 1 Timothy, that God ordained civil government. You're not to be without civil government. That's anarchy. But they've just wiped out governments. So what do? The same guys who wiped out the state governments then turn around and go home to their states and start creating the very first governments in American history. For example, you take folks out of New Jersey, like the Reverend Dr. John Witherspoon. He heads home to help write the brand new Constitution for New Jersey. You also take folks like out of Maryland. You have Charles Carroll of Carrollton, Maryland. He heads home to write the new Constitution for Maryland. These guys have just wiped out state governments. They're not to be without government, so they go create their own. And as you look at what they did in creating these early state governments, there's so many of these founders that had an impact in their state constitutions. Let me take you, for example, to Delaware. Delaware writes their new constitution in 1776. And the guys that were key in writing that constitution, you see there in that picture of those who did the Declaration. You see, for example, folks like Thomas McKean. You also have George Reed. You also have John Dickinson. Well, these three guys from Delaware, they go home, write the brand new Constitution for Delaware. If you read the 1776 Constitution of Delaware, done by our founding fathers, interesting provision in that Constitution. Constitution of Delaware says this: every person who shall be chosen a member of either house must say, I do profess faith in God the Father, and in the Lord Jesus Christ, His only Son, and in the Holy Ghost, one God and blessed forevermore, and I do acknowledge the Holy Scriptures, the Old and New Testament, to be given by divine inspiration. Wow, what a requirement to hold public office. We would love that if that was a requirement for seminary today. That was a requirement for public office in Delaware under the Founding Fathers. Now, why would they do that? What kind of policies do you think you'll get from those kind of people? People who understand this about the Scriptures, that there's accountability. They're going to make sure that they don't do things that tick God off, and therefore the whole nation gets blessed, the whole state gets blessed. That's what they understood. You have that with other constitutions as well. If you take, for example, the Constitution of Massachusetts, a number of the Founding Fathers who signed the Declaration went home to write the Constitution of Massachusetts, including Robert Treat Paine. You have Samuel Adams. You also have John Adams. You have John Hancock. Great Founding Fathers we all recognize wrote the Constitution of Massachusetts. 1780 is the original Constitution, by the way. It is still in play today. It's the only Constitution in the world older than the United States Constitution. Massachusetts still uses the first and only Constitution they've ever had, 1780. And this is what it requires in that Constitution written by the Founding Fathers. Any person chosen governor or lieutenant governor, counselor, senator, or representative must say, I do declare that I believe the Christian religion have firm persuasion of its truth. That's still the requirement in Massachusetts today. Yeah, but they don't follow their Constitution anymore, just like a lot of people don't follow the U.S. Constitution anymore. We don't know it. We don't have people in office who think it's important, so we ignore things like that. And this is not to say that, hey, we discriminate against everyone who is not a Christian. That's not the point of this. And this is not what Article 6 in the Constitution prohibits when it says there can be no federal test, no religious test. It's the federal government that can't say, hey, you've all got to be Baptist or Methodist. They didn't want a national denomination like we had in Great Britain. They're not excluding God. They're not excluding the fear of God. Matter of fact, the Declaration starts, its first premise is we, and it says, we in the unanimous 13 states in Congress assembled, we say there is a Creator. That's a government declaration. We believe in God. We believe there's a Creator. We've always believed that until people who didn't like God started telling us we couldn't say that publicly. And again, that's because we had the wrong people in office who don't like that position. But again, this is the notion that if you have God-fearing people in office, you'll get God-fearing policies in office. It doesn't have to be Christians. There's a lot of, quite frankly, there's a lot of God-fearing Jews I'd rather see in office than a lot of Christians I know in office because they understand biblical principles better. So you get God-fearing people in office, and that's what they're trying to do. They're trying to do the Proverbs 29:2 thing that when the righteous rule, the people rejoice. When the wicked rule, the people groan. You go to other states. Let's take on to the state of Pennsylvania. Now, Pennsylvania, the signer of the Declaration from Pennsylvania who helped write their Constitution is Ben Franklin. So Ben Franklin goes home in 1776 to write the Constitution of Pennsylvania. Ben Franklin's our least religious founding father. Look what Franklin puts in the Constitution of Pennsylvania, 1776. It says, and each member of the legislature must say, I do believe in God, in one God, the Creator and Governor of the universe, the rewarder of the good, the punisher of the wicked, and I acknowledge the Scriptures of the Old and New Testament to be given by divine inspiration. That's Ben Franklin, least religious founding father. But notice, he doesn't want you in office unless you believe there are future rewards and punishments. Unless you believe that you're going to answer to God for what you do. Because if you know that you're going to answer to God for what you do in office, there's a lot of stuff you won't do in office. And if you won't do that in office, the whole state's going to be better off. We'll have better policies. We're not going to have the corruption. See, that's what you get out of that kind of, it's state after state. I mean, go to North Carolina. You see the same kind of results in North Carolina. North Carolina, 1776 says, no person who shall deny the being of God or the truth of the Christian religion or the divine authority of either the Old or New Testaments shall be capable of holding any office or place of trust or profit in the civil department within the state. All of this was designed to point toward Proverbs 29:2, which says, when the righteous rule, the people rejoice. When the wicked rule, the people groan. You will find the Founding Fathers put an emphasis on putting the right kind of people in office. Now, with that emphasis, there's an aspect of American history that becomes interesting that led up to the Founding Fathers where you had a debate over what are the right approaches philosophically to government. And there were two sides taken. One side was taken by folks like John Locke. Now, John Locke is a political philosopher. He's considered a theologian. He wrote commonplace commentary on the Scriptures. He wrote several defenses of Christianity. But he's the guy who helped write the original Constitution for Carolina back in 1690. And Carolina was originally one colony. It was not North and South when he wrote the Constitution for them. So his philosophy is very simple. He says, we've got to keep this thing where we can have righteous government. The best way to do that is to make sure that we load up the Constitution with all these good God-fearing laws, and then no matter who gets in office, if they get in office 200 years from now, they're going to be bound by all these God-fearing laws in the colony's Constitution. So he created the 1690 Constitution of Carolina with that philosophy, that if we get good laws in there, then no matter who gets in office, we'll have good government. That was one approach. Another approach was used in Pennsylvania. It was used by the Reverend William Penn. And William Penn in Pennsylvania said, no, it's not how good your laws are, it's how good your leaders are. And so the emphasis needs to be on the type of people you put in office, not on the type of documents you have. And so when he created the frame of government for Pennsylvania in 1681, 1682, he explained why he went in a different direction. This is what he said. He said, governments like clocks go from the motion men give them. And if you'll think back, at that point in time, if you had a pocket watch, if you had a grandfather clock, whatever it was, as elaborate, and they had some really cool grandfather clocks. They had ships that would sail across that would tell you what year it was, what month it was, what day it was, what hour it was, whether it was AM or PM. It would even show you when sunrise and sunset was. But as elaborate as those clocks were, they all depended on what people put into them. If you didn't take that key and wind it up, it didn't work very well. And so it was completely dependent on the effort that people put into that clock. The clock by itself is cool, but it doesn't work unless people put the right effort in it. And he says governments are just like that. It's what people put into them. He continued. He says, and as governments are made and moved by men, so by them are they ruined too. You can overwind a clock and ruin it. It's got all these great features, but you can blow it up and completely ruin it if you don't do the right thing. He continues, he says, wherefore governments rather depend upon men than men upon governments. In other words, if you've got the right people in office, you will have a good government. If you have good government and bad people in office, it'll be a bad government, no matter how good your documents are. He says, let men be good and the government cannot be bad. But if men be bad, let the government be never so good. They'll endeavor to warp and spoil it to their turn. They can have great laws, they'll find a way to get around them. He says, I know some say, let us have good laws, and no matter for the men that execute them, but let them consider that though good laws do well, good men do better. Nothing wrong with having good laws and having a good constitution. But that won't do it by itself, as San Antonio has discovered. Who cares what the U.S. Constitution says? City Council has said something totally different from what the U.S. Constitution says. So, though good laws do well, good men do better. He says, for good laws may want or may lack good men to uphold the laws, but good men will never want good laws and they'll never allow bad laws. There were 55 individuals who framed the Constitution of the United States. One of those individuals is John Francis Mercer. And he made a really, today probably considered a startling declaration to the rest of the delegates. So there they are trying to write the Constitution. And he says, by the way, guys, you do realize this Constitution we're writing is not what's going to govern us? And this is what he explained to them. He said, it's a great mistake to suppose the paper we're to propose will govern the United States. Well, what did they think they were doing? They thought they were writing a document to govern the nation. He said, guys, if you think the document's going to govern the nation, he said, you're dead wrong. He said, that's a big mistake. He says, it's the men that will bring into the government and the interest they have in maintaining it that will govern them. What the Constitution will do is show you how to get people elected to office. If you don't get the right kind of people in office, this document will be absolutely worthless. He said the paper will only mark out the mode and the form, men are the substance, and men must do the business. We're writing a Constitution here, but that won't ultimately be what governs America. It will be the people that you elect under that Constitution. They will be the keys. So this is a philosophy that was understood all the way through. It's a biblical philosophy, and it's something that, again, biblical thinking people and people of faith and Christians, you got to get a hold of today. If you don't understand how important leaders are in this process, and by the way, people say, I don't want to be politically involved. If you believe that, don't read the Bible, because the Bible is all into political involvement. Verses like this, passages like this, history like this, we believed all the way through the people of faith had a role in this. Now, as you move from that, this philosophy of the righteous rule of the people rejoice, if you start getting politically involved, people start thinking about political parties. I mean, that is invariably what comes up. And so let's talk about political parties for a minute. The problem we have today is there is such a partisanship in America and two big primary parties, the Democrats and the Republicans, and there's 17 third parties of all types. You got Green, you got Libertarian, you've got Constitution, all these other parties. Let's just talk about political parties for a minute. And to do that, put aside all notions you have of what constitutes a political party. Don't think of in the modern term. Let's go back historically and look at what constitutes a political party and why they're created and what they do. And to do that, I want to take you back to an early government book that we used in the United States, a very popular government book. This particular edition is from 1843, but the Young American Book of Government and Law. It explains to young Americans, and by the way, we didn't wait till we were in high school to start teaching civics. This was elementary stuff. We started teaching government and law to kids at a very early level. If you think the Constitution is complicated, don't read old textbooks, because way back in 1828, we had elementary catechisms on the Constitution. The questions we were asking elementary kids on the Constitution, most judges on the U.S. Supreme Court couldn't answer today. And we were doing this for elementary kids back then. So we started off teaching law and government because that's a big thing in the Bible. As a matter of fact, when the founders wrote the Declaration of Independence, they specifically said, and Richard Henry Lee, one of the signers of the Declaration, said, we, quote, copied the Declaration from John Locke's two treatises of government. We used to read John Locke's two treatises of government in every government class. It was required reading because that's where our government came from. That's where the Declaration came from. We haven't read that book in government class in 50 years. And it's not because it's too long. It's less than 400 pages long. Well, then why don't we read it? Because that book, The Two Treatises of Government by John Locke, written in 1690, gives 1,500 Bible verses on how civil government should operate. Oh my gosh, if we read that in school today, people might think that government is not as secular as we tell them it is. Well, that's exactly, you know, I've asked groups of pastors before, I said, name Bible verses you can think of on civil government. I've never gotten more than 5 in any group. There's a book with 1,500 Bible verses on it. So we've moved away from that knowledge of the Bible, but back then we used to tell our kids at the very beginning, hey, you need to know about Constitution and law and government because this is a big biblical subject. So look what they said in teaching these kids early on in America, way back in 1843 and for generations before and after, about political parties. Here's what they say about political parties. See up top, it says, political parties have existed in all free governments. They spring from the different views which different persons take of great questions affecting the public interest. Persons entertaining the same views will associate together and act together to carry the measures they approve and defeat those they condemn. So what happens is people say, hey, we want to move this forward, whether it's in San Antonio and they say we want to move the non-discrimination ordinance forward, or it's the pastors who say we don't want that ordinance going forward. You get a view, you get people who believe that view, you get together. It continues as this. Other persons entertaining opposite views will also associate together to counteract the operations of the first party thus founded. A political party is nothing but people who want to get together to enact a particular policy. But if you do that, there will be people who oppose that policy. There will always be at least two political parties on every issue because there's those that are for and against. So don't think of Democrats, Republicans. Think of quite frankly, those pastors who got together in San Antonio, they're now a political party because they're trying to move a particular policy forward. Well, those that don't want that policy forward, they're the other political party. So political party means absolutely nothing. Its name means nothing. It's there to exist a certain set of ideas, to advance a certain set of ideas. But there's a danger with parties as well. And if you look at the danger that we can have with political parties, I think this book explained it very well. It says, thus always begats another. And as ambitious individuals are apt to put themselves at the head of these several parties and excite them against each other, there is usually a great deal of bitterness between them. It has often happened that persons have become so devoted to party as to forget their country, and in some instances, patriotism has been swallowed up in party spirit. Now what happens is you forget the principles you're fighting for and start loving your party more than the principles for which you were founded. And that's what happens so often with political parties. That's where they get off track, and that's really where America is today in so many ways. Republicans, Democrats, any other party, they have a love for their party. Now, there's a lot of people in those parties who don't love the parties. They love the principles, they want to advance principles. That's why you have a Democrat platform, a Republican platform, and a Libertarian platform. There are people who want to see that platform go forward, but there's others who love that. And George Washington warned us in 1796 in the most famous political address ever given by a president, his farewell address. He warned us that the greatest enemy to America was to love a political party more than you loved principles. Let me show you what George Washington said about this. This is from 1796. He said, "Let me warn you in the most solemn manner against the baneful effects of the spirit of party. In popular governments or in elected governments, it is truly their worst enemy." What, a political party is the worst enemy of free government? I thought you had to have political parties to move agendas forward. Yeah, but if you have a political party and start loving it, you're in trouble. He says, "The alternate domination of one faction or one party over another, sharpened by the spirit of revenge natural to party dissension, is itself a frightful despotism." He says, "The common and continual mischiefs of the spirit of party are sufficient to make it the interest and duty of a wise people to discourage and restrain it." He explained that if you love your party more than you love principles, that will destroy the nation. So we've always had political parties, and Washington wasn't opposed to a political party. He belonged to the Federalist Party. And by the way, kind of funny, George Washington belonged to the Federalist Party. You know what the other party was called back then? It was called the Anti-Federalist Party. How simple can you get? Well, whatever you guys are for, we're against. And that was the Federalists and the Anti-Federalists. Two opposite views, but that's the way parties always are. We get a little more sophisticated today and we use different names, but they still exist to counteract each other because they have different worldviews. When we say nonpartisan, the first thing that should come to mind is federal judges because they're nonpartisan. They're not there to help either party. Yeah, but anybody who believes federal judges are nonpartisan doesn't know anything about what goes on in real life. I'll give you an example. Let me just take one judge. This is Federal Judge Samuel Kent. Samuel Kent, federal judge, involved in an incident that happened in Santa Fe, Texas. Santa Fe, Texas is a little town outside of Galveston down on the Gulf Coast. And in that little town of Santa Fe, they had a school district. And in that school, as long as they had been having athletic events, they had prayer over their athletic events. And as long as they'd been having graduations, they had prayer over their graduations. Well, somebody gets all ticked off. We don't want to hear somebody say the word God out loud. So they go to Federal Judge Samuel Kent and say, make them all stop praying. We don't want to hear the word God. Graduation's coming up, and make them stop praying. Well, Judge Kent offers his ruling. Now, he's taken an oath to uphold the Constitution. We assume that he's read the Constitution. We're now under the First Amendment of the Constitution, which says Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. That's where he's going to issue his opinion, because that's where prayer would come in, is in that part of the Constitution. So he does issue his opinion. It's called Jane Doe versus Santa Fe Independent School District. And he says, well, I've looked at the situation, and here's what I'm going to do. And let me just read you from his, and he's a nonpartisan judge, remember. This is what he says. He said, the court will allow prayer to be a typical non-denominational prayer, which can refer to God or the Almighty or that sort of thing. The prayer must not refer to a specific deity by name, whether it be Jesus, Buddha, Mohammed, the great god Shiva, or anyone else. And make no mistake, the court is going to have a United States Marshal in attendance at the graduation. If any student offends this court, like by mentioning Jesus in a prayer, he said that student will be summarily arrested and will face 6 months incarceration in the Galveston County Jail for contempt of court. Anyone who thinks I'm kidding about this order better think again. Anyone who violates these orders, no kidding, is going to wish that he or she had died as a child when this court gets through with it. Now wait a minute. The part of the Constitution that we're looking at says Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion prohibiting free exercise. I don't think Congress is involved with this. I don't think they made a law establishing religion. What we got is a valedictorian who wants to say the word God at graduation, and the judge now says, okay, I'm going to have a federal marshal come in and listen to the words in your prayer. And if you say the wrong words in your prayer, I will arrest you on the spot. You'll get 6 months in jail. Where'd that come from? Not out of the Constitution, came out of his worldview. I remember that when this decision came down, I took a copy of it with me. Judge Kennedy delivered a decision. I was with a group of about 70 congressmen. And I said, hey, guys, did you just see what happened here? And I read them that part of the decision. They said, on what basis does he make that ruling? I said, well, that's his worldview. They said, no, you're not understanding. On what basis does he make the ruling? Why did he decide that? I said, that's his worldview. That's what he personally believes. No, you're not understanding. What part of the Constitution allowed him to say that? No, guys, you don't understand. This is his worldview. And they just could not get the notion that this guy had a worldview that would overcome the Constitution, overcome precedent, overcome. That's the way it is. People have a viewpoint, and that will guide everything they do. So the most important question to ask about any person running for office is, what worldview do you hold? Because you will hold a worldview. I don't care what you say your party is. I don't care what you say you're going to take an oath to uphold. You've got a worldview that will guide and direct what you do. And so that's where we are with the worldview thing, and that's why it's important for Christians to understand that about political parties. So political parties do exist, but we're back to the notion that if you get the right kind of people in office, you get the right kind of results. Wrong kind of people, wrong kind of results. That's a choice that we make. Now, he moved from that. One of the reasons we understood that it was important for Christians to be involved in office and politics, and I don't mean in the way of running for office, but even in voting. And let me take a little caveat here to explain something. One of the purposes of public education in America, every state constitution says, is to prepare students for active and informed citizenship. Okay, that's why we spend $120,000 a year in public education, so that we can get students who come out ready for active and informed citizenship. You have 67.1% of adults who are registered to vote. So what we have is we're coming out of government-run schools, and 1/3 of us say, I want nothing to do with this government, with this system, with it. So we're down to only 2/3 are registered to vote. Now, since 1980, in the last 35 years or so, in presidential elections, the turnout of that 67.1% is roughly about 53, 54%. So of the 67% there, we're voting half of that, which now means choosing the president is being done by 1 out of every 3 Americans. And since it only takes a majority to win the presidency, out of 33, 34% that do vote, you only need 16, 17% to win. So we're now down to 1 out of 6 Americans is who chooses the president of the United States. 5 out of 6 aren't making that choice. That's a real easy thing to change if we were to decide we wanted to get involved and vote. And quite frankly, Christians say they represent 78% of the nation. And that's the stats that are out there. Evangelicals are somewhere in the number of 120 million. If they ever decided they wanted to vote, we wouldn't have a culture war in America. If we just got Christians to go choose godly people for office, but they, at a higher rate than the general public, Christians say, I'm not going to get involved in this. Well, we're choosing, 1 out of 3 Americans is choosing the president. Let's go to an off-year election where we choose our governors and our senators and our reps, not choosing a president. Now we're down to only 1 out of every 4 Americans votes in choosing governors. And then when we get to a city council election like San Antonio and these other cities who have non-discrimination ordinances, out of the 67% that are registered to vote, only 3% actually do vote, which means only 2% of total adult Americans vote in a city council election. So you get a city council that is elected by only 2% of the adult Americans in that city. And you get the policies you get, That's why if Christians would learn that, no, when the righteous rule, the people rejoice. If I get involved, I can make a difference. It's really easy at the city level especially. Founding fathers understood this. Benjamin Rush, John Adams called him one of the three most notable founding fathers. He signed the Declaration, he ratified the Constitution, he served in 3 presidential administrations. He's the father of American medicine. He started the first black denomination in America, helped found it. He's a huge civil rights leader. He did the first faith-based prison reform in America. He started the Sunday school movement. He started the first Bible Society. He started 5 universities. He's the first professor of chemistry in the United States, wrote the first chemistry textbook, first psychiatry. Guy's unbelievable. He's also called the father of public schools under the Constitution. And what happened when the Constitution was written in 1787, ratified in 1788, 1789, we start the federal government in 1789, he says, you know, we've been 13 colonies up to now. What type of education does it take for us to be a nation? We've had education for our colonies, but now we're a nation under a constitution. What do we need to educate our students on? And so he went through, and in 1790, the very next year, he wrote this piece, The Mode of Education Proper in a Republic. This is why he's called the father of public schools under the Constitution. He's the first one to start saying, what should we be teaching in education to keep us unified as a nation? Interesting, he said there's 3 primary responsibilities of public schools. He said the first responsibility of public schools, the first thing public schools have to do, he says they have to teach students to love and serve God. And that's the first thing he says is love and serve God. He said the second thing public schools have to do is they have to teach students to love and serve their country. And he said the third thing public schools have to do is teach students to love and serve their family. Now notice the order there. He says God, country, family. If we were to do that today, we wouldn't make that order. We would say, no, it's not supposed to be God, country, family. It's supposed to be God, family, and country. That's the way we say it today. But he said, no, it is God, it is country. Why would he put it in that order? Why would he elevate country above family? Because he said if you ever lose control of your country, you'll become the great enemy of the family. Oh, that's where we are. We've lost control of our political system. Now we're doing what we can to try to salvage our families because so much of the garbage we have to deal with in our families comes from the government itself. And if you lose control of your country, you lose control of your government, it will be the enemy of the family. That's why they said being involved in country is above being involved with family because that's how you preserve your family. Sam Adams said the same thing. Sam Adams, the father of the American Revolution, he said this. He says, every citizen will see, and I hope be deeply impressed with the sense of it, how exceedingly important it is to himself and how intimately the welfare of his children is connected with it. He said, now, you need to understand this is important for you, but it's really important for your kids, that those who are to have a share in making as well as in judging and executing the law should be men of singular wisdom and integrity. Your kids depend on having the right kind of people in office. If you don't get the right kind of people in office, you need to understand that'll affect your welfare and especially the welfare of your kids. I mean, we understood that politics, our family was really downstream from politics. And that's the emphasis they put, and that really is the right emphasis, and that's proven by God as well. Matter of fact, if you look at the 3 institutions in the Bible, you start with marriage, man and a woman, then comes civil government, then comes the church. The second institution that God created was civil government. He created that before He created the church. So this is an important institution to God. That's why He tells us in 1 Timothy to pray first of all for government and those in authority. He didn't say pray for your family church first, your church first, pray for your business. He said you pray for government first. That's pretty high importance to God to put that the first thing you pray for every day. So we've got to get that back in our thinking. I don't care about government. All I care about is my family and my job. No. God says, first of all, you need to be praying for government because it affects your family, it affects your business, it affects everything else you do. There's no way around that. The Bible says, choose out of all the people able men such as fear God, men of truth, hating covetousness, and place such over them to be rulers of thousands, rulers of hundreds, rulers of 50s, and rulers of 10s. You need to choose out people at the local, county, state, and federal level. Now, it gave you qualifications for office there, but let's just talk about choosing out this rulers because choose out is an important term there. When you start choosing out, what is it that you're looking for? Where do you find the right leaders that are not thorn bushes? Take Ben Franklin, and again, we're always told Ben Franklin's the least religious founding father, and he said, you know, if you really want good people for office, he says the Bible shows us how to have good people in office. He said, look at what God chose for leaders and rulers. And so he goes through, and this is what he quotes. He says, it's observable that God has often called men to places of dignity and honor, to political office, when they've been busy in the honest employment of their vocation. They're already busy doing stuff. They're already, yeah, if you're productive, you're the guy I need in government. You know, I don't want somebody who doesn't know how to run a business or run a family I want people who are already busy doing stuff. And so he points out, he says, notice, Saul was seeking his father's asses and David keeping his father's sheep when they were called to the kingdom. They're already busy with stuff. Their life was full. The shepherds were feeding their flocks when they had their glorious revelation. He said God called the 4 apostles from their fishery. They were busy fishing and making a living. And Matthew from the receipt of custom, Amos from among the herdsmen of Tekoa. He says Moses from keeping Jethro's sheep, Gideon from the threshing floor. He said God never encourages idleness, and He despises not persons in the meanest or the lowliest employments. God's looking for busy people who are already successful at what they're doing. That's the kind of people you want in office. But that's the olive tree, and that's the fig tree, and that's the vine that says, no, I'm too busy being productive. Well, see, it's an interesting thing. In this process of choosing out, the way we used to run politics and elections in America is very different from what we do now. You would go into a voting booth with a blank piece of paper and it says, who do you want for president? Who do you want for governor? Who do you want for your U.S. Senator, for your U.S. Congressman? Who do you want for your state rep? Who do you want for your mayor? I'll give you all these options. And so I'll look in there and I'll say, oh, I want John Smith for my mayor, and for city council, I want Sarah Johnson. And I write down all the names. There was no names on the ballot. So you write down the names, and then after everybody turns in their ballot, they would tally up all the names. There might be 40 names at a position, but whoever got the most votes for that position, they went to that person and said, okay, the people have said that they want you to be their mayor. You going to serve? Now, it's interesting that on this philosophy of the people recognizing their own leaders, the Founding Fathers took a very firm position that says anybody who puts themselves forward for political office, you need to instantly disqualify them. Anybody who says, I'm your leader, follow me, that's not the leader you want. People recognize their leaders. If I have to tell you I'm your leader, we're in trouble. And so look what people like Sam Adams said on this. Sam Adams said, it bodes very ill to government when men are exalted to places of high trust through their own solicitations or seeking the office. You go out and say, I'm running for this office, that's not a good deal. He continued, he says, he only fills a place with dignity who's invited to it by his fellow citizens from the experience they've had of his adequate abilities. He says, whoever interposes in elections with his own seeking of office for himself is to be feared that he will in time become a dangerous party man. He ought therefore to be despised, some intruder. Wow. See, that's what we're filled up with today, people who keep pushing themselves for office. They want to make this their profession. By the way, Noah Webster, who wrote a number of textbooks, also stressed to students, be very careful of people who put themselves forward. This is what he emphasized. He says, as a general rule, it may be safely affirmed that the man who never plots and schemes for office may be most safely entrusted with it. He says, such a man cannot desire promotion unless he receives it from the respectable part of the community, for he considers no other promotion to be honorable. Unless the people push him forward, he doesn't want to be there. The people you want in office are the people who don't want to be there. The George Washingtons, every time he got a chance, he retired. He went back to Mount Vernon. John Adams, he didn't want to be there. Patrick Henry turned down an election. Well, actually, I say turn down. You know, the Founding Fathers taught that you're not allowed to turn down an election. If the people say, I want you to be whatever, I want you to be mayor or governor, you're not allowed to say no. Now, Benjamin Rush, remember, I told you he's the father of public schools under the Constitution. Look what he taught in schools and taught students. And he says, very simply, he, a citizen, must love private life. Love your business, love your family, but he must decline no station, however public or responsible it may be, when called to it by the votes of his fellow citizens. If I come out and say, they've chosen you to be governor, you're going to serve? You're not allowed to say, no, I'm not going to serve, because that's being selfish. That means your life belongs to yourself. They said, we need you serving. You exist to serve others. And that's what Benjamin Rush pointed out. Remember, none lives to himself. That's Romans 14:7. Nobody lives to themselves. He says, even our old age is not our property. All of its fruits of wisdom and experience belong to the public. God made us to serve other people. And if other people come to you and say, we need you on the school board, for you to say, no, I'm not going to be there, that's pure selfishness, because now you have an opportunity to serve in a community. See, that's the way we were taught in previous generations, that you are here to serve others, not here to serve yourself. That's why we had such better political leaders in previous generations, because as much as I didn't want to be it, they told me that I need to be, and so I'm going to serve in office. And those are the best people, because when they get there, they'll actually serve. They're not there for the money. They're not there for the name. They're not there for the fame. They're there and they recognize they've got a job to do and they're going to get it done. And that's the best people you want. So that's the way we looked at elections. Now, you look at this choose out. There's another interesting thing here. Who is it that does the choosing? We often say, well, it's elections. The people do the choosing. No, this was a command given to Moses, the leader. And Moses records that I was told to choose out, and I did, and I brought them to you, and then you voted for them, but I'm the one that went and recruited the leaders on this thing. And so what you find is the biblical model is that while the people vote to ratify, a lot of times it's a spiritual leader who does the choosing. I mean, think about when Saul was anointed king. Who was it who anointed Saul king? The Electoral College? No. It goes back. It was the prophet Samuel who said, you're the guy that's supposed to be in civil government. And when David became king, who chose him to be? Well, it was Samuel that chose David and said, hey, God's chosen you to be in civil government. And then when Solomon became king, who chose him? Well, it was Nathan and Gad that went and anointed Saul. It was always the spiritual leaders choosing out the civil leaders, and then there was the vote, if you would. That's where the people ratified and chose who they wanted. But why is it that the church doesn't do this today? Oh, I'm not going to have anything to do with politics. No. From Judges 9 and from all throughout the Scriptures, it's supposed to be the spiritual leaders that say, hey, you know, I've watched you, I've watched your family, you're doing a great job with your business. We need you over here on the Public Utility Board. We need you over here on the Junior College Board. And it was spiritual leaders who would go to others and say, you need to be serving your community in a bigger way. And there's a lot you can offer. And so that was the notion, but we don't do that anymore. I mean, now how come we don't? You know, because we bought in this thing, the church is not supposed to be involved in stuff. That's not biblical, it's not historical, it's not constitutional. We buy into it. But there's another thing that goes with this. We're very sophisticated. I am from Texas, and in Texas we have a very pro-life legislature. No question that we've passed all sorts of pro-life laws. And because of the technology we now have in so many areas, I get these great emails from pro-life groups in the state that says, hey, your state representative is so-and-so, and there is a meeting in a committee today at 2:30, and he's part of that committee, and you need to call him right now and tell him to vote against this amendment. And they keep me informed on every single pro-life measure that comes up, and when I need to contact my rep, and what I need to tell him, and I love it. You know, high technology is there. And I've probably, over this last session, gotten 50 emails from them on pro-life bills as they're going through and how to weigh in and have an influence. I appreciate what they do, but I've never made one call. 50 opportunities, I've never contacted my state rep one time. Why? Am I lazy? No, it's not that at all. It's because I'm the one who recruited my state rep to run for office. I know what he believes. See, the problem is that you want to recruit people, you don't have to lobby. If I have to call my state rep and say, you need to vote pro-life, I've already lost the battle. He should be there because he's going to vote pro-life or defend marriage or religious liberties or understand that we need limited government or that the city is not supposed to be punishing you if you want to stand for your Christian. You elect people to office that you don't have to lobby, and that's what you want to do. But having said that, what that really means is you have to recruit people for office. You don't want to lobby. Because the good guys just don't step up. I mean, you got to recruit them, you got to push them forward, and that's the role of we as believers, as people of faith, as biblical folks, as churches. We got to start pushing the good guys out and say, we need you. It's time for your service. There's way too much corruption going on here. We got to have a different worldview. When the righteous rule, the people rejoice. When the wicked rule, the people groan. We got way too many thorn bushes. We've got to get in that process again. So having said that, this is how we had done this historically and biblically, and this is what we understood the role of the pulpit was. Now, let me take you from that into looking at the problem we're having today with this biblical notion. Because go back to Exodus 18:21. Remember what Exodus 18:21 says. It says, you shall select from all the people able men such as fear God, men of truth, hating covetousness, and place such over them to be rulers of thousands, rulers of hundreds, rulers of fifties, rulers of tens. Now, this is the election process. This is what creates a Republican form of government. By the way, Article 4, Section 4 of the Constitution requires we be a Republican form of government, that we choose leaders. We're not a democracy. We're not intended to be a democracy. We're not allowed to be a democracy. We have to be a Republican form of government. We choose leaders at all these different levels. Founding fathers actually who helped do the Constitution quoted Exodus 18:21 as the reason they did this in Article 4, Section 4. But go back and notice the qualification for office. God said, you shall select from all the people able men such as fear God, men of truth, hating covetousness. Now, that's the four universal qualifications you look for, whether they're dog catchers or president of the United States. You want to look for people who are able men, such as fear God, men of truth, hating covetousness. Those are the four universal qualifications you start with at every level of office. But notice something. Notice how that able man comes before fear God. A lot of time we say, oh, I want God-fearing people. Great. But why does God put able man in front of God-fearing? Is it that He doesn't think God-fearing is important? No, He does. But what happens is a lot of times you get God-fearing people in office who are absolutely incompetent, and they make God-fearing people look like a bunch of dwarfs because they're not good at what they do. Now, it doesn't mean you have to have able men or God-fearing men. You want all of them. But it's not enough to have a God-fearing man who is not an able man. That's why you choose people who are successful in business, successful in what they're doing. You want them with a track record of having been productive and creating jobs and having limited government and all the things that go with it. That's what you want. So you choose able men, such as fear God. But this is where we have a difficulty today with Christians, quite frankly. The problem we have with Christian candidates, and I have gotten to the point where I no longer use terms like Christian. I've gone off of that. I don't care whether you're Christian or not. I care whether you're biblical or not. And let me give you an example. You take the United Church of Christ as a denomination of 1.2 million in America. Way back, 7 years before Roe v. Wade, as a denomination, they voted and called for abortion on demand as a church position, 7 years before Roe v. Wade. Now, what Bible verse will you use to say abortion's right? Well, there's none, because the Bible has tons of verses on the other side. They may be a Christian denomination, but that's not a biblical position. In 1976, that same denomination called for same-sex marriages. Tell me who was thinking about same-sex marriages in 76? This Christian denomination. That's not biblical. I was one of the commentators on national news coverage on presidential election night. And I told him, look, I'm not going to do the red-blue stuff. I don't care who does the Electoral College. Here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to watch the ballot initiatives, because there's 176 state ballot initiatives being elected this night. And ballot initiatives are neither Republican nor Democrat, but they tell me worldview. They tell me what people think. And if I see how people are voting on ballot initiatives, I can tell you how the election is going to turn out, because I'll know what they're thinking. And so as I watched that night, this was the second highest Christian voter, second highest evangelical voter turnout we'd had in the last 35 years. We really got our people out. So I was elated at what I thought was going to happen. And I looked at those 176 ballot initiatives, and it didn't go well. We had 4 states voting on homosexual marriage. We had 6 states voting on marijuana. And then we had all sorts of states voting on other issues. One of the issues was, should physicians kill people or save their lives? It was a 50-50 vote. They couldn't decide whether physicians should kill. Wait a minute, what are you thinking to think that physicians should kill people? And then you get into issues like gambling. Well, gambling passed everywhere it went. I mean, there was no way to stop gambling, especially casinos. Man, Christians love casinos. 75% of Christians cannot name a single Bible verse that deals with gambling. But we're out there supporting all this stuff on the other side. You know, it came Planned Parenthood. We had ballot initiatives on should the state defund Planned Parenthood, and we said, no, we like Planned Parenthood. And then we had ballot initiatives, should the state protect religious liberties? No, we don't think the state should. I mean, these are Christians voting, and we just proved that Christians, we have this serious problem with biblical illiteracy. We don't know what the Bible says. So it's not whether you're Christian or not, it's whether you're biblical or not on all of these positions, and that's why you have to recruit so well. Now, when you look at this, George Barna has confirmed something I think is worthwhile for every Christian to see. George Barna, who's with the Barna Group, they do tens of thousands of polls over the last 30 years or so. This is what George said. He says, of the more than 70 moral behaviors we study, he says, when we compare Christians and non-Christians, we rarely find substantial differences. When we look at polling, and think of 70 moral categories. I don't know, that's adultery, that's lying, that's pornography, that's abortion. He said, when we look at that, you can't tell the difference between Christians and non-Christians in 70 moral categories. Let me give you some stats on that. Take something like divorce rate. Now, this is where we can tell the difference with Christians and non-Christians. So in this particular category, we have 27% of born-again Christians. That's the divorce rate for born-again Christians. Well, if you're not born-again Christian, what is it? It's 24%. Ooh, well, if you don't even like God, what is it? It's 21% for atheists, agnostics. Wait a minute. The lowest divorce rate in the nation is atheists, agnostics. The highest divorce rate is with born-again Christians. So if I want my marriage to survive, I need to be an atheist, statistically? That's not the way it's supposed to work. That's not biblical. As a matter of fact, you'll find that 87% of Christians who got divorced did so after they received Christ. So apparently getting divorced is part of the new life in Christ? That's not the way it's supposed to be. That's not biblical. See, so that's one of the things that Barna Group shows. I'll show you another example. Abortion, 250,000 abortions a year performed on born-again Christians. Christians who don't know the Bible. We have homosexuality. Among active homosexuals, 27% say they're born-again Christians. Again, don't know the Bible. You also have issues of fortune-telling astrology. There is no difference in the people in percentage of Christians and non-Christians who embrace the practices of astrology, fortune-telling, psychic. The Bible's really clear on that. So issue after issue after issue, there is no statistical difference between Christians and non-Christians, 70 different issues. That's why Christian doesn't mean what it used to mean. Biblical is the term now. You want biblical folks, and you're looking for biblical folks, and that's who you're after. So the problem with Christian candidates, just a lot of them don't think biblical. Now, let me take it and kind of wrap this down by saying, okay, what do we do with strategic planning here? Let's say that you're one of those many cities who's had a non-discrimination ordinance. And by the way, in strategic planning, this comes out of the Bible. In 1 Corinthians 9:24, the Bible says, don't you know that those who run in a race all run, but only one gets the prize? So you need to run in a way that you're going to be the one who gets the prize. Now think of the marathon in Boston or the marathon in Mexico City or Johannesburg. Tens of thousands of people run. Are they running to win? No, they're running to say, I ran in a marathon, I ran in the Boston Marathon, whatever it is. Only one person actually comes out of there with the prize. That person runs a whole different race. There'll be 30 or 40 people that are going to try to win, and they run a whole different strategy than everybody else who's just out there running. And that's what you have to understand in politics. You don't want to just run, you want to run to win, which means you have to have a very tactical and a very strategic plan on how you do it, both tactical and strategic. So in looking at what happens with city councils and other things, let's just take this non-discrimination ordinance because it's spreading across the nation, and whatever city, I don't know, Oklahoma City or Omaha, Nebraska or Hot Springs, Arkansas, wherever it's going to come, is suddenly you get slapped upside the head like San Antonio and said, look what they just passed. They just criminalized me speaking, me saying it. I can't even run for office if I say that homosexuality is wrong. What is the deal here? So you get all ticked off at the city council, and if it's like San Antonio, it was an 8-3 vote, and over in Honolulu it was even more than that. So you get ticked off at them, and the first thing Christians want to do is we're going to take them all out. We're going to wipe them all. We're going to have a referendum and show them exactly what the people think on this. And then we're going to do a recall and get all those guys out of, and so they get ticked off and they rise up, and that's what they want to do. There is an axiom that goes with lawyers in court. And lawyers in court, the axiom is you never want to ask a question to which you do not already know the answer. When you get in court, you don't want to be surprised. You want to know, and so you ask the questions to get the information out you want. You don't want to get shocked with what comes out. I didn't see that coming. So let's say, you know, you got the city council map and we're going to do a referendum. No, you don't even want to think about a referendum unless you know you're going to win that referendum. Let's say that you get that referendum up on the ballot and you lose it by a 70-30 margin. What have you just done? You just told the city council Christians they're impotent. They have no strength. Well, we're talking about only 2% that do show up to vote. That means that basically 98% of adults aren't showing up to vote, which means probably 98% of Christians aren't showing up to vote. And unless you've got a plan to get them to show up on that referendum, you're probably going to strengthen what the city council did by telling them that we really are weakest Christians. Well, you know, those 8 guys that voted for the non-discrimination, we're going to take them out. So you run a recall election on all 8, and all 8 win the recall election. You don't take any of them out. What have you just done? You just told the city Christians never need to listen to them again. They have no power, no strength. They're way out there. What you do is you start strategic planning. Say, okay, San Antonio, it's got 300 churches that want to change this. All right, I want to see where those 300 churches are in those districts. I want to see where they're spread out. And if I've got a bunch of churches in one district, I know that that's a district I want to run somebody in. And if they happen to be a church over here, only 2 churches in the district, but each of them have 20,000 members in the church, that's all right. I only need churches. So I need to see where Christians are distributed. I need to see where churches are distributed. I need to go start recruiting candidates, because even though there may be a vulnerability, if I can't get a good candidate to run, if I can't get somebody to step up, then I don't want that guy to win the election and think that he's stronger because we ran a poor candidate against him. So this is where Christians have to kind of cool off and back up and say, hey, we need to do a little strategic thinking here and how we plan this and go after it. And you can't do that when you're angry. You have to back off. And anger is a good thing. And the Bible tells us to be angry, but sin not. Anger is something that gets you motivated and stirs up. And you got to get motivated and stirred up. So anger can be a good thing, but don't try to strike back when you're angry. You sit down, you calculate and say, okay, here's what we've got to do. And when you do something like that, you can change the whole image. Let's say that we're going to target 5 of those city council races. Out of the 7, we're going to target 5. If we win 5 out of 5, what have we just told the city council? oh, these Christians are really powerful. And so next time a vote comes up, they're going to be scared to death to vote the wrong way because they saw what happened to the 5 guys that the Christians targeted and took out. And Christians, again, biblical folks, God-fearing folks, anybody who respects biblical values. And so that is part of the strategy you have to use. You can't just get upset. I mean, we've been out of this process for so long that you can't dive back in it and think you're going to be a master at it. But you can start looking at your church and say, you know, you would be a good guy for city council. I need to go introduce you to about 30 other churches in the district. They need to know that you're the person for city council. We can all get behind you. And so you start doing the groundwork. You start doing the legwork. And at that point, you can start taking this again. But that only happens if we get our mindset back that it is proper for Christians to be involved in the civil arena. And if we don't get involved in the civil arena, we will lose our Constitution, we will lose our family, we will lose our values. And don't think of politics as a partisan thing. Think of it as salt and light in the civil arena. And if we do that, it will make a difference. If you get interested in this type of stuff, there are resources that you can go to at wallbuilders.com. Founders Bible will tell you how the founders thought about how they approached this, how the Bible shaped policy. You also have a lot of other resources there. And you can also go to the nationalblackroberegiment.com and get a lot of resources for churches and for other things in your community. So it's time for Christians to get back involved in the process. We can't be non-participants in this thing. We can't continue to be part of the 98% that don't vote in city elections. We can't be part of that 67% that doesn't vote in presidential elections, and we can't be part of that 75% that doesn't vote in governor elections. We got to get back involved in the process. Thank you guys for being here. God bless you.